Welcome back to Sean and Ari Discuss Israel. Ari, welcome back.
Thank you, Sean. It's good to be back.
Okay, so this week's episode, we're going to discuss your recent trip to the United States.
Yes, it was quite a whirlwind and a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to getting into it with you.
Okay, so let's start with Ari. Where did you go? What did you see? And we're going to ask you later on about your impressions. But first off, tell us about your trip. Where did you go? And a little bit about the people you met.
All right, so the trip I just went on was actually the one stop I didn't make was Los Angeles, and that was the idea originally. I have a friend there who heard an Israeli speaker and thought that he really just, he didn't really have anything important to say, and he didn't really have any real experience. He said, "Hey, Ari, you've done so much reserve duty. You've heard you speak before. Why don't you come in and speak with the community?" And I said, "Sure, great." And in the end, due to the fires in LA didn't work out. But I spoke in a Jewish community in New Jersey. I spoke in the communities of New York. I then spoke again both in Salman Schechter and in Son's home in Chicago. And then I spent an entire day on campus, on the Illinois University campus in Champaign-Urbana with Chabad and a friend of mine who's a professor there.
Okay, so it sounds like a tour where you got to see a lot of different places and a lot of impressions. Let's start off with, what was the message you gave to the different communities?
So you're right. I got to see the conservative Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community, the campus community. In Chicago, I spoke with a group of people who basically aren't even Jewish for the most part. It was the overwhelming majority of the people in the room. So I saw a large cross-section of Jewish and non-Jewish life in America. Again, very short, very small sampling size. It was very fast. I was in the United States for not even 5 full days. And I came with the idea of spreading a message of unity, of love, of mutual support was my initial idea. And I realized very quickly that's not the message that the American community, Israel supporters, needs to hear right now. And that's also not the message that I truly embody in both the actions that I've taken over the last year and a half and the message that I want to get across. And I quickly shifted my entire message and my entire talk, as we're calling it, to one of pointing out that we're now in a global war of good versus evil, of truth and honesty versus lies and hate, and that Israel is at the forefront and on the front lines of this global war, the same way the students on American campuses are, the same way some legislators in Europe are, but that this war includes, this battle is global and includes all of us, and that we need to be on one side. We need to be on the good and honest side, or the bad and the evil and the lying side. And it's very clear now who's on what side in the world, and we each personally have to make a choice of which side to be on, and then what that means for us and how we can do it.
Okay, I want to go back to that in a second, because you said you started off with one idea in mind, and then very quickly you realized you needed to shift to that very strong message of there are clear battle lines between good and evil. Did something happen while you were there to make you understand this, or did you feel yourself leaning in that direction anyway?
So, me personally, I always leaned in that way. I don't mince my words, as our listeners know. I'm not hiding who I am. I'm very proud of who I am and what I believe. The message of unity and love, while I agree with it, it's not that, I don't embody that message very well, because I believe that's important, but that's secondary to being strong and proud of who you are. And I realized that, I was going to trust the greater judgment of the Jewish communal organizations, the ones we all know that have been around forever. And I was kind of going to mimic their message and give it my own flavor. Was kind of my idea at first, to say I'm not going to question them. They clearly have been doing this longer and much more than me, and they know better than me. And I realized that that's just not true. I realized that the Jewish communal organizations and leadership, they failed American Jewry. They failed Israeli Jewry. They failed Jewry at all. They made the tent so big and so inclusive and watered down the message of Judaism so much that they made it irrelevant. They made what their message is irrelevant, and that people are thirsty for some genuine, real Jewish pride. What opened my eyes to that, I think, was more of a conversation I had with the person sitting next to me on the plane on the way into America. It was an Israeli who, when we were talking about what we're doing in America, they were going to visit family. I explained to them a little bit what I'm going to do, and they're like, but isn't that obvious? Like, don't American Jews know this stuff? Like, don't they watch the news or see? I'm like, and I realized that it started laying the foundations of the idea in my head that while Americans have the news and they have sources, they don't have the context. They don't have the bigger picture open in front of them, and they definitely don't have the Jewish communal, leadership and support that's gonna be able to take what they're feeling now and give it, skin, and not just the foundational belief, but give it, expand it into real what that means. And during my first talk in a conservative shul in New Jersey, very welcoming community, great people. The average age was over 60. It was, as an afternoon event, and just from the way I'd say the audience vibe I was getting while I was speaking, every time I said something that I was prideful, like where I talked about my army service, not as a burden, but as an honor and a privilege, you saw their eyes light up. When I spoke about the ideals that the soldiers on my team and myself shared about serving the Jewish people, serving the Jewish nation, and not looking out for our own personal interests, their eyes lit up again. And I realized that my engagement with the audience was much stronger when I talked about being a strong Jew, being proud of who we are and standing up for your belief. And every time I talk about the unity and the love and the respect between the communities, they were all there already. They believed it, but it wasn't like their eyes weren't lighting up with excitement, like, ooh, this is what I wanted to hear.
Okay. Your initial idea was speaking about unity and harmony between not only the communities in the US, but also between Israeli and American communities.
It was also between Israeli communities, because a lot of the feedback I got before I came was that American Jewry is worried that Israel's falling apart at the seams, that the Jewish community within Israel is like on the brink of civil war. That was the message they were hearing before this war, with the judicial reform and all of the protesting in the streets, that Israel's falling apart at the seams. And it's at the point where it's so bad that even American Jewish communal involvement can't even save Israel anymore. And I came to share this message with that Israel's never been stronger. We've never been more unified within ourselves. We've never been more unified than we are today. And the unity between the diaspora Jewry and the Israeli Jewry has never been stronger. Like, this concept that we're at odds with each other or that we're falling apart is not just not true, it's about as far from the truth as possible. So my idea was to come and break this myth and share this vision of unity and strength using my own personal examples from how I serve on a team that includes people from every aspect of life, and the reality of the community I live in that includes, again, Jews from every aspect of Jewish life, and how we all supported each other and our families supported each other while I was away, and use these as examples to show that we're really not that far apart. And the enormous, amazing outpouring of support from the beginning of the war of the Jewish communities that continues to this day at unprecedented levels, that that just shows that we can, they can say what they want in the media and we can write whatever we want about it in our Jewish papers, but the reality on the ground is our communities are unified and are connected, and to try and break that idea. And I realized was that most people recognize that already. They understood that things are not nearly as bad and dark as, for whatever reason, it was trying to be made out to be. So I realized, like, why share a message that everyone already knows?
So instead, you refined your message to make it a lot more personal, and it hit home better.
It wasn't just more personal, I made it more powerful. I made it more powerful and more personal, and it didn't just hit home. I've been invited back already by multiple places. I have invitations. Unfortunately, I don't think that I'm going to be going back to the States now until the fall. I mean, maybe again in the very near future, but I can't imagine the logistics of that. It's extraordinarily impractical to fly to the U.S. at the moment. But maybe we'll see what happens.
We'll speak about your future plans and escapades at the end of the show. But let's move on. You were in Jersey. You said you met with the older conservative community. From there, you went to?
So every day I had like one big event, and then I had lots of smaller meetings on my own. So I had a big event Sunday afternoon in New Jersey with an older conservative community, which, again, great, comfortable way to start the week. I landed first thing in the morning and went straight there. I met with reporters in the evening who work for lots of different publications. A lot of the reporters I met with, and I'm not going to use any of their names because they all asked me to have this whole thing kept quiet, was they're reporters that don't necessarily report on Middle East or Israel policy at all. It could be they reported for completely different sections of their institutions, but they're all Israel supporters, and they're all in the closet about it. Most of them were also not Jewish, and they're closeted supporters of Israel because they realize if they come out and ever say anything too strong in support of Israel, their publications will sort of, stop publishing them as much and find someone who toes that line of progressive leftist, Islamic ideals instead of them. So it was more of a meeting that they can have, the reporter who set it up is a close friend. And she set up this meeting so that they'd have a personal connection to someone who can answer their questions about Israel, answer their questions about the current war, and that now when they want to write about something and they're not sure if the context is correct, or they want a source, whether I'm named or not named, it's irrelevant, to help them sort of contextualize what they're writing about that somehow is magically connected to the Israel-Arab issue for no reason.
So you've brought up something really interesting, and I want to stick with that. There is a lot more clandestine support for Israel, especially in the non-Jewish communities. People who acknowledge and realize that Israel is on the right side. Like you said, Israel is on the right side of this battle, and they're worried about being too open in their support. Did you have other experiences like this?
Across the board. That was my biggest experience. I found the most frustrating is that, I brought this message. I simplified my message, whereas that currently, since the end of World War II, there hasn't been such clarity in the world as good and evil as we have today. The last time we had the clash of good and evil was World War II. Western liberal Judeo-Christian values against Nazism. It was simple. There was no ambiguity about it. Nazism was evil, and Western Judeo-Christian values embodied by the American coalition was good. And they were completely right in that understanding of the world. Since then, the world's gone very gray. It's not black and white anymore. When we look at what's going on here in Israel, there's no ambiguity. Israel and the Jewish people are very much good, and Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and their supporters are absolute embodiments of evil today. You can't argue with that. I mean, people do argue with it all the time, but then again, people argue with everything. But there's reality. There is truth and there's lies. There's good and there is evil in this world. There's black and there's white. And what inherently Americans are recognizing now is that this value system does exist. That Israel, you can say whatever you want about Israel, and the end of the day, doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Israel is good, Hamas is evil. Israel is good, Hezbollah is evil. Israel is good, Iran is evil. And they don't want to be on the side of evil. They intrinsically understand that they were raised with these values, these Western liberal values. Don't teach us that men and women are the same. No, men and women are different. We each have different roles to play, each one respectively. This mixing of what's truth and what's a lie has gone so far, and they're recognizing, okay, this is nonsense already. I want to be on the side of truth and good. Now, they're not willing to risk their professional careers or their futures or the million and one other considerations that they have because they have nothing to gain from it. So in the end of the day, I'll vote how I vote secretly. I'll have my ideals. I'll raise my children the belief system, but I don't have to say it publicly. I can keep my ideas to myself, keep getting promoted at work, keep living my life because it doesn't cost them anything. You know what? I don't blame them at all. And that's totally fine for them to live that way in America as Americans, if that's what they want. And hopefully that they'll become the not so silent majority in more and more places in the U.S. and the United States will be strengthened by it.
All right. The next thing I wanted to ask you is your impressions this time versus the last time you were in the U.S. I mean, yes, you were born there, but when was the last time you were there?
So I think the last time I was in the United States was about 6-7 years ago. I was there on behalf of a different organization that I'm no longer affiliated with for good reasons. And I was speaking in American Jewish communities, fundraising about education and stuff that's near and dear to my heart. And it was very different. I think that it was just simpler. I think now when I go back, there's more of a galvanization, I would call it, within the Jewish community. First of all, the older generation has gotten older. We've gotten older ourselves, but I think that there's the younger generation is recognizing that the reality that their parents and grandparents who built the Jewish communities in America, who are currently leading the Jewish communal life, that the reality of today is no longer the reality in which they prepared their communities for. That in major cities, New York, Baltimore, Chicago, the Jewish communities are under physical threat, which is something that I don't think anyone ever really thought about up until now. They're always worried about assimilation and education. They were never really concerned with public safety and security. I definitely think they're realizing they're under physical threat. Whereas at the same time, it was like I talked about at the beginning that they watered down the message of Judaism to be tikkun olam, fixing the world, and love thy neighbor. And they watered down all of Judaism to that. And then they made the tent, we always want to make the tent as broad as possible to include as many people. But they went so far to the point where now everyone's included in that tent, including people who represent ideals and ideologies that are in complete opposition to the foundations of Judaism. And they made that tent and these ideas so broad that they watered it down, that now people are looking to go back a little bit, to retreat back to the foundations of Jewish belief. Not necessarily to be Orthodox Jews, but the Orthodox Jewish message, and to be proud of who they are and what they stand for. Okay. And I don't think that 7 years ago there was as strong as the feelings. I think it was more like, yeah, everything's wonderful. We'll play, it's good. It's not that nothing is really pressing at the moment.
I hear it. Okay. So your next stop on your trip and your discovery was?
Monday actually was, I had a little bit of time to myself for the first time. Visited a friend from high school. I went back actually, a little personal story here. I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. No one thinks of me as a big art fan, but I can appreciate some of the greatest works of art by humans in history, some of the most outstanding works. But there's one painting in the museum that I've always found very inspirational. And it's the painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware. When he suffered his first defeat in the Revolutionary War, and he was crossing the Delaware to winter on the other side and regroup and rebuild.
I think it was even Christmas Day.
It may have been. I don't remember the exact details of history, but it's an extraordinary. First of all, the painting is absolutely enormous. I mean, it's twice the height of a person, and it's enormous, and the detail is extraordinary. Just from an artistic point of view, I definitely think it's up there on one of the greatest works of art by mankind. But it shows a commander, even in defeat, he's leading his men with his head held high, the flag waving. He has his main staff around him in the boat. And you can see that he has this, his facial expression in the painting is one of hope, a little bit of humility, where he realizes he was just defeated. But it was humility that said, okay, I have what to learn from, and I'm going to come back and win this. And that painting took on a whole new meaning to me after this time. In my reserve duty, I serve on the battalion commander's team. And I'm looking now, George Washington commanded a lot more than a battalion, but if you look in the boats around him, it's very clear that the men in the boats around him are his staff. And the guy rowing the boat, that's like me and my men, who have to get the commander from point A to point B and protect him and guide him. So it was very personal all of a sudden, that this historic relationship to it. So I found that to be that really inspired me again. It was nice to go back to something from a previous, chapter in my life and have it have relevance again in my current chapter. And that evening I spoke in Riverdale in the Orthodox community. Not a packed crowd. They've had a speaker pretty much every other week from Israel since the beginning of the war. But it was nice to be able to reassure and reaffirm the community and give them a message of hope and strength in the face of what seems very bleak. Most of the people in the room have, children in Israel or family members in Israel who are either in the military, about to be in the military, or in many different capacities living here and really suffering because of this war on a personal level. So it was really nice to be able to reassure them. Judging by the feedback I got, I did a very good job. It was also interesting to hear the questions that people, because again, when I give a talk, I'll speak for about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, depending on how much time I have. But what I really look forward to is when I open up for questions at the end. And the audience can start asking me what it is that they want to hear about, or what interests them, or which specific part of my talk is what they want me to focus on. And the questions I got they weren't political in nature, but they were really trying to understand why, as outsiders looking in, why the Israeli leadership is making what seems like these absurd decisions that just seem ridiculous to them looking from the outside in. So I had a lot to defend a government that I don't necessarily support. I had to remind people that I'm not a representative of the state of Israel. I'm not the prime minister. I'm not the defense minister. I'm not the foreign minister. I'm not even a member of Knesset, at least not yet. And it was very interesting. It was interesting to have to, defend something, not necessarily defend the decisions that were made, but at least give them the context and remind people that when we look back at things in hindsight, hindsight's 20/20. When you look back at the decisions that were made, then with all the information you have now, so that the decision obviously is right or wrong. But at the time when you make the decision, you don't have all that information. So it's helping, give context to things that were done without necessarily supporting it, but just to explain them. And then again, I was able to lay forward what my vision for Israel's future is if I were to magically become prime minister tomorrow.
I'm curious to know what was the different places you spoke, and we'll also speak about your discussions on campus. What was the general feeling within the Jewish community and the people you spoke to about their experiences, firstly on October 7th and in the last year and a half? Let me rephrase. How did things change for them in your mind on and after October 7th?
So from what I can tell, the biggest change that happened is how in Israel we also had a huge shock to our system, as a country. We had to wake up. And I think a lot of the country woke up out of this slumber of thinking we can sit back a little bit. We're on the brink of world peace. Everything's going to be great. And remember who our neighbors actually are. So I think in America, the communities were also took a tremendous shock to their system, where all of a sudden, maybe what the communal leadership is telling them isn't necessarily true. Maybe things in Israel aren't as hunky-dory and utopian as we build it up to be in our heads, and that maybe our own status here when we're abroad in diaspora, maybe we're not here in as strong a safe position as we thought. I think they called a lot of their own reality into question the same way we called it into question here. They called their reality into question there. One thing I noticed, again, I don't know if this was because of October 7th, but I could definitely say from this trip to my previous trip 7 years ago, was physical security was very different. In every institution, all of a sudden, the way you get in and out of the buildings was very different. They didn't want to publicize my talk as much. They publicized it within their communities, but they wouldn't put flyers out on social media with my name or picture on it. One, for fear that it would affect me personally, and two, because they didn't want protesters outside. I can say one thing to the credit of Chabad, and where I was on the campus, that they are definitely not afraid of who they are and what they stand for. It was a pleasure to be with them. So I think that there's a lot of insecurity that's gotten even worse since the war started. Whereas here we had it the initial shock put us back in a position of confidence and security, I think.
All right. So let's move on after that, your next events. And most importantly, I want to hear about your impressions of the protests against you at the campus.
So we'll get to the protests after. So my next stop was Chicago. In Chicago, I met with 7th and 8th graders in a Salman Schechter. It's actually the event I was the most afraid of was 7th graders. I'm not really sure why. I was a little bit, it was on the spot. I don't remember how many of them were in the room, but they're 7th graders, so they're a little bit too young to really talk about the realities of war, but they're too old to say, childish nothings, as I'd call it. They were incredible. They were way more engaged than I had thought they would be. Their questions were sharp. They picked up on trying to understand what it was like for me as a father to leave my children, things I did not think they were going to ask me. Of course, you always have the one kid in the crowd oh, how many Arabs did you kill, or how many times did you blow something up, and well, okay, yeah, don't worry about it. Let's move on. That's not the point of the talk today. But I was incredibly impressed by the engagement that they had, which is a huge, which is credit, I think, to their educators and the teachers that they have. And then I met with a group of 8th grade boys who, for them, it's also now more real. They're 13. It's not, the soldiers aren't that much older than them. They all had older brothers who were around 17, 18 years old at least. We went around the room, and they could understand and internalize that everything I'm talking about could have been their older brothers if they'd been living in Israel. I thought that was a powerful experience for them. It was definitely a powerful experience for me. It gave me a lot of hope that maybe American Jewry isn't in as bad of a situation as I think it is, seeing what the next generation is capable of. That evening, I had a private dinner with a group of basically all doctors who are married to other doctors. And besides for the person who organized the event, I think we were the only 2 Jews in the room. So I start off by saying I've never been in a room with 30-something doctors, and there's only 2 of us who are Jews. So it was a little bit, it was interesting. There was extremely smart people who again, highly engaged, closeted supporters of Israel because they all want to keep moving forward in their careers. But this was the first engagement that they had with an Israeli who served in the army, who can give them, this is reality. Like this is what you see on the news. This is what it is on the ground. I was just there a few weeks ago.
Okay, I want to ask you about this. Firstly, you hinted it before, and we had spoken about the fact that you received a lot of support that surprised you from non-Jews, everyday guys and women in the US just from your travels. What were some of the questions you got from this, again, highly educated audience that, as you said, are closet supporters of Israel?
So one of the main questions that stuck with me was they wanted to understand why Israel's foreign minister, I don't remember the exact wording that they used, but why the PR war that Israel is playing is not just more blunt. They were saying, like, listen, you have Trump in the White House being Trump. Why don't you guys just play a literal Trump card? Just stand up for yourselves. We're Jews. We're proud. We're good. They're evil. We win. They lose. Like, zehu. Like, that's the end. Like, bottom line. Like, why does Israel insist on playing this, like, very, like, miskin almost, like this, like, play the victim card. You're not the victim. Like, stop being the victim. They couldn't understand why a country that is so clearly in the right, wants to play this victim card. They understand completely why Ukraine does it. Because I asked them, like, can you put in a little more context? And we understand why Ukraine, we're not really a Western country. They're not necessarily, their hands aren't always so clean. They had all these justifications for why Ukraine should play the victim card vis-a-vis Russia. Because also, Russia is considerably larger and, in theory, stronger than them. And they're saying, but you guys aren't the victim. Play your strengths. Why are you trying to play these weaknesses that you guys don't have? And I really, I said, unfortunately, I'm not the foreign minister and I don't have control over that. But if I was in charge, it wouldn't be that message. It was this, they were trying to understand why, they understand why American Jews aren't proud or stand up for who they are. It's a little dangerous. You're taking a risk. They couldn't understand why Israel and the Israeli Jews, except for me, who they saw as the first time they met someone, I'm saying why Israel's the official representative, why they're not standing up and being proud and strong of who they are and not, playing this BS victim card game. They couldn't understand it, and that was the most shocking for me, how it's obvious to me, it's obvious to them. I think someone on our end in our leadership position needs to check again what they're doing.
Okay, I like that message. Wait, you said this wasn't the first experience you had with a predominantly non-Jewish audience or an experience with not your average Jewish American, but Americans in general. You said there were other type of experiences like that.
I had a couple of other experiences where just because, I'm not hiding my kippah. I'm not hiding who I am. I can't stand on a stage and give a message of being proud of who you are. And then when I go, to fill up the rental car with gas, I take my kippah off because I don't want to have to be, I don't want to have to be the Jew in the gas station. So no matter what, the second I land in America, whether my kippah came off on the plane so I wouldn't lose it, from the minute I land in America, my kippah goes on my head and stays there. Even if it's uncomfortable, because I'm proud of who I am and I'm here to represent something, and I have to represent and fulfill that role no matter what. So there were a couple instances, again, in gas stations or, I stopped on the side of the road for Starbucks to get a cup of coffee on my drives where, one guy held the door open for me and I said, thank you. Because, in America you have manners. I said, thank you here too. And he's like, no, it's my honor to hold the door open for a Jew. I said, thank you very much. I'm not really sure what I've done to receive such great honor. He's like, no, your nation's been taking a lot of crap for years and generations. And even me, it's only now that I've recognized what a great and strong people you are. So this is the least I can do for a Jew when I see one. I said, thank you very much. And I appreciated it. I had other instances similar to that. Not many, but it was very heartwarming. And again, it fed my own optimistic beliefs that maybe the West isn't in as bad a situation as it seems from the outside.
I like that. All right, let's move on to the rest of your trip. So after Chicago,
Champaign-Urbana. I'd say the highlight, the finale, and I think the most enjoyable part of my trip. I was on a college campus at Illinois University. I was the whole day with Chabad. I didn't even reach out to Hillel. I worked out with Chabad. There's a friend of mine who's a professor who brought me in and connected me. And multiple events throughout the day, but I was surrounded the whole day both by a leader within the Jewish community, Rabbi Dov Teichtel, an outstanding educator. Watching the way his students interact with him and him with them is inspirational, is literally awe-inspiring to see how he interacts with the students. And just to be able to be in that environment, I felt more. So I came to inspire, and I left completely inspired. But let's talk about the fun part.
Right. So we're definitely going to put it in the show notes, the YouTube discussions, and most importantly, the videos. While you were there, word got out that Ari was in town, and it appears there was a protest. Tell us about that and your experiences.
So Chabad wanted to, ask me permission if I'm comfortable with them publicizing the event, taking all of the realities of America today into account. And I said, listen, the only thing I appreciate is if you don't publicize my phone number, email address, or my last name. Use my first name. If someone's going to come after me, I want them to have to put in a little bit of effort. So they publicized freely. We had a whole radio interview on the local talk radio station to push the event in the morning. It was open to the entire community, not just the students. And I had a small meeting before the big event in the evening. We had a small get together with the student leadership, like the student board, the senior volunteers, where I gave a little bit of a talk about what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a role model, both to people younger than you, as the younger students, you're a senior to a freshman, and within your community, and they're all going to be parents. They're graduating college. They're all going to be parents, in the next decade at least, if not sooner. What it means to be a role model and a leader for your family, for your community, for your place of work. And while we were finishing up this talk, a protest opens up outside, and they prepared a sign that said Ari is a murderer. So, there was a police officer stationed at the entrance to Chabad. So I walked over to him. I said, with my hands out to arrest me, and I said, according to them, I'm a murderer. And he looks at me, he's like, oh man, no, you're definitely not. You're good. Don't worry about it. So when I opened up my talk to this room of about 400 students, everyone, the rabbi spoke before me, this professor spoke before me, the student president of Chabad spoke a little bit, and they were trying to allay the fears of their students because they recognize that, it's uncomfortable to have to walk through a protest to there. So I decided, I'm going to open up, I'm going to talk about the protesters too. So I said, let's look outside from it. The purpose of my talk was that there's good and evil in this world, and good always attracts evil. It's like the story of Hanukkah. The darkness is there. We need the light to vanquish the darkness. But the second we vanquish it, it gets attracted to us again. The more you do good, the more you attract the bad and evil. The more you tell the truth, the more liars come at you, because you're shining a light on their lies. You're shining your good on their evil, and they have to extinguish your flame in order to continue existing. So as long as you're doing good, they're going to be out there. So I said, first of all, a protester handmade that sign. He spent at least 20 minutes, half an hour thinking about me, investing in me. I haven't even given him half a second of thought. So I'll take that as a point of pride, and that he honored me with that. And I said, on the other hand, it's a minus however many degrees outside, snowing out, so I'll give them a little bit of a break, but I'm a little insulted that there's only 14 or 15 of them standing out there protesting me. And I said out there, it's easy to support evils and lies in fair weather, but when it starts getting uncomfortable, that's when we see who the true evildoers and the true supporters of evil are in the world. And I gave that message over of strength, of not of even when that evil is there and they're shouting and they're screaming, that's a point of pride. That should strengthen and embolden you to know that you're doing something right.
So with all of this, you saw various different communities, good and bad, Jewish, not Jewish, campuses, etc. What did you learn? What did you come away with in general from your whole trip?
So I came with a few ideas. One is American Jewry is in a better place than I thought they were. I personally thought that American Jewry is done for. They're going downhill, another generation, maybe two. That's it. What I realized is that there are pockets, there are people who are extraordinarily strong, and they're there, and they just have to be strengthened more. I'm not exactly sure how to do that for the entire American Jewish community. I think there's the biggest investment, which I think is being made and should be continuing made, is on the campuses. Because again, the next generation, they're the ones that are going to have to lead the Jewish community moving forward. They're the ones who are going to take on those leadership positions and guide the people that come after them. And they're the ones that really, they suffered from this watering down of Jewish values over, people my age and our parents. They watered down Jewish values, and they made it so almost meaningless. And now they're kind of standing out there like, okay, just give me something real to latch onto. Give me something real. Don't give me this, oh, we're here to shine a light on the world and, fix everything. Kumbaya, tikkun olam. That's not Judaism. There's no way that's what Judaism is. No one goes to war. No one goes to fight in a foreign country to protect Kumbaya and Tikkun Olam. That's not real, right? You don't have a history of Jewish warriors from King David to the Maccabees to the IDFF today for Kumbaya and Tikkun Olam. That's not a thing. So there's got to be something real here, and they're searching for that truth. And the second they hear it and they see it in a strong message, it's like their eyes light up and they're like, wow, this is what I've been looking for. So I think that we need to strengthen those messages. I think that Israel as a whole could be leading that charge more clearly. And I look forward. I think that on campus life is really the place to focus at this point. And I'm looking forward to doing more of that.
Just before we sign off, one more thing. A Jew living overseas, whether it's in campus, whether it is on a campus or in business, doesn't necessarily have to be in the US. It could be in Europe or Australia or South Africa. What is a message you want to pass on to them now?
I think the biggest message to pass on now is to not be afraid and not be ashamed of who you are. Be a proud Jew, support Israel, and take that fight. For each person could do it in their own way, whether it means responding to comments on social media or posting yourself or conversations just with your coworker who's sitting in the cubicle next to you. Call people out on their BS. Call people out on the utter and total lies that they're spreading. Be a proud Jew. That's all I'm asking of anybody. Stand up for who you are, stand up for what we believe in, and don't be ashamed of it.
And finally, you spoke about going back to the US probably in the fall. I think it's important. Give us one more message. And in the show notes, we will leave your contact information so that people can contact you directly and start booking you up for potential speaking engagements.
I think one final message is, I can't really emphasize it enough. Be proud of who you are. Educate yourself. Don't believe everything you see in the media. And stand up for the Jewish people and the Jewish ideals. I look forward to coming to speak in your community and on your campus.
Well, Ari, that really left us with a great impression. As somebody who hasn't spent a lot of time in the US, I spent more time in Europe. I also had a more negative impression about the trajectory of Jewry in Chutz La'aretz, overseas. And I'm beginning to change my opinion as well. And I look forward to hearing more about your travels and experiences.
And I as well for your travels, and we'll talk about them another time.
We will. Thanks very much for joining us. If you like this podcast, please share, subscribe, like, and leave us a comment. We'll be back with more from Sean and Ari next week.